All right, so we are dealing with Hurricane Dorian, which has come off of the Eastern Caribbean and has intensified into a Category 1 hurricane. That was well established yesterday. It's been fighting some dry air today. It's not been in the, it's been in pretty favorable conditions, but it's still struggled a bit, which is certainly good news. But it is on a path where it's going to have some untapped, very warm Atlantic Ocean temperatures. It's going to have very low shear. It's going to have plenty of background moisture, and it's going to be in a prime position to intensify as it approaches the southeast coast of the United States. We're currently here looking at a infrared satellite image, and you can see it, kind of had that classic look last night. It looks a little bit disheveled now, but as we have gone into the nighttime hours here, as the sun has set, there's been some convection that's exploded around the center, and it certainly seems like it's getting its act together. I thought that the 8 p.m. advisory would be out from the National Hurricane Center by now, but it has not, and I don't, unless I missed it for some reason, I don't think that has been the case, but, certainly intensifying, it seems to be intensifying. Hurricane Hunter aircraft actually went in there and had discovered the pressure had dropped, so that is certainly the sign of an intensifying storm, and we will have to keep an eye to see how Dorian progresses as it continues for the next couple of days toward the southeast coast of the U.S. So I want to start off the way I start off with most of my videos here, and I want to show you if there's ever an active tropical cyclone in the Atlantic Basin. The first thing you want to do, you want to hop over to Google, you want to type in NHC into the bar, you want to hit return or enter on your keyboard. National Hurricane Center is the first option that pops up here. You want to click that, and then you're taken to this landing page where you have the active storms in the Atlantic Basin. Currently, we have Hurricane Dorian as the only one, and a big deal it has become as it threatens the southeastern coast. You can hover over and get a summary of the storm. Currently, maximum sustained winds at 85 miles per hour. Minimum central pressure was at 986, but like I mentioned, the hurricane hunters were in the storm, and it appears to have dropped down into the 970s, signifying an intensifying storm. And as you can see here on this hover, this was as the 5 p.m. update, so we still have not got the update. Maybe it will come in during this live stream here, and moving at a pretty good clip at 13 miles per hour. You can click this, and I'm going to pause right here. I'm not able to view comments if there are any coming in, so I want to ensure that I am getting a view here in case anyone's trying to interact with me and I'm not able to see them. There we go. It looks like we're back online now. So, all right. Now if anyone comments, I'll actually be able to see it. So coming back to here, you can click on that storm and then you're taking all this information. And a very important slide here from the Hurricane Center. They do these very well worded, concise key messages here. And I want to kind of go through these before I dig into some of the actual meteorology here. The risk of life-threatening storm surge and hurricane force winds this weekend continues to increase in the northwestern Bahamas, and hurricane watches could be issued there tonight or on Friday tomorrow. Residents should have the hurricane plan in place and listen to advice given by local emergency officials. There is an increasing likelihood of life-threatening storm surge along portions of the Florida East Coast late this weekend or early next week, although it is too soon to determine where the highest storm surge will occur. And you can read the rest of these and go back and do the video. But one thing that someone had been talking about on Twitter that I thought was worth mentioning, the northwestern Bahamas are very much in this just as much as Florida. It's not U.S. soil, but, the northwestern Bahamas there and the out islands of the Bahamas, the Grand Bahama Island and Abaco Island are both Abacos Island, yes. They're very much in play here for significant weather to be coming to them by later this weekend. So that's something we have to watch. So, here you have the infamous cone here, and it still has not been updated yet, which even with 8 p.m. advisory, we wouldn't have a track update. That only updates 5 p.m., 11 p.m., 5 a.m., and 11 a.m. So unless there's a special advisory issued. So we will have to watch this. But one thing I want to point out that's been a very important factor in the changes of the forecast recently. This all looks well and good the way it has the past couple of days, but take a look at these points right here. This has Hurricane Dorian as a major hurricane off of the coast of Florida, 2 p.m. on Monday, on Labor Day. 24 hours later, it has only moved, a couple 100 miles, maybe if that, into central Florida. If you've been following the tropics the past couple of years, slow-moving storms have seemed to be in the norm, and that means a lot of rain and a lot of wind over a long period of time. The model trends have been slowing the storm down a lot, and that's certainly increased the flooding risk, and that's something that's been a trend that's been continuing for a couple of days now, where the storm is really starting to slow down as it starts to curve back out to sea. How early it does that or how slowly it does that is going to be key in who gets the worst impacts. And I put this little blip on the description for this video, and I think it's worth noting, you know, there's not a lot of certainty I can provide about the storm right now, but there are 3 things that are certain. Someone's going to get worse conditions than were forecast. Someone is going to get exactly what was forecast, and someone's going to get a lot less than was forecast. That's the only certainty I can give you right now, and that's the nature of the science. That, you know, the atmosphere is a fluid. It is a very dynamic system. It is enormous. It is massive. That's just a fundamental fact of meteorology. It's very unpredictable. I know it's frustrating to hear meteorologists say the same things over and over about uncertainty, but the uncertainty is certainty in meteorology, and that's something we have to adapt to and expect. So it's frustrating to hear that, but that's just the name of the game with the tropics, because they are such dynamic systems with minds of their own, something we have to focus on there. All right, so getting off my soapbox there, still slowing down there, and that's going to be a major impact for the flooding threat. And I wanted to kind of go over to here. Someone asked about water vapor last night, and I thought it was a great question. How, you know, these darker shadows down here represent where the drier air is down in the Caribbean. Up here in the Carolinas, we had a very nice day today. You can see in the corner, there's some drier air up here with kind of the shadowy colors. And Dorian was in less favorable conditions, but then it has since scooted up north of the Caribbean, north of Hispaniola, north of Puerto Rico. And now there's a lot more of this kind of grayscale color. There's not any dark shadows, not any dark air or dark colors, which would indicate dry air. So it's in a very moist environment. There's a lot of background moisture already available. So the storm kind of has been given the green light by the atmosphere to kind of explode and intensify as it continues on its track in this general direction. I stopped the arrow there because once we get to this time frame out here in a couple of days, you know, by Saturday, where exactly Dorian goes is still unclear, but it's going to be somewhere along the East Coast. There are still possibilities. There are some models indicating that a landfall may not occur, and it may very closely skirt. Think of Hurricane Matthew a few years ago. I hate bringing up past storms, but that could be a possibility for this storm, that it could just, you know, kind of clip and hang around for a long time. A very dynamic storm. We have to see what exactly happens. But, you know, the moisture is there, background moisture is there. Shear is going to be relaxed in the atmosphere. It's going to be very calm. And then you have, you know, warm sea surface temperatures. Obviously, there's a lot of deep, warm water over the Bahamas. That's why it's such a nice place to go vacation. Very nice, warm, clear waters. But it's also very good fuel for tropical cyclones as well. So going ahead, I wanted to talk about, this was a great tweet from Jack Sillen from weather.us, and that is a company that provides weather products. By Monday, there will be 4 features tugging on Hurricane Dorian: Gulf of Mexico upper level low and Atlantic ridge that push west, shortwave trough that's pulling northeast, and the continental ridge that pushes southeast. The magnitude of each of these forces will determine Dorian's track. And then this last sentence you can kind of disregard. That's just saying what that model that he posted here was doing. So I blew up this image in the next frame here, and this is why the forecast is so complicated. There's going to be a ridge building out here, and I'm going to change the color so it's a little more clear what I'm trying to show here. And I'm going to make the pin a little bit bigger. There's going to be a ridge building out here, and the rotation around a ridge is clockwise. Okay, then we have the same thing down here. We're going to have an upper level low, which rotates in the same direction as the hurricane itself, tropical cyclone. It rotates like this, so it's going to be pushing this way. We have a continental ridge that's going to be over this way, pushing this way, and you can kind of get the picture here where I'm going. There's a lot of different forces as indicated by the arrows that was provided by the person who composed this tweet. There's going to be a lot of different forces pulling on Dorian. This model here has, you know, it in East Central Florida, and there's going to be a lot of forces that very slight shifts in each, and how strong Dorian is itself, you know. Hurricanes succumb to the influential parts, or let me say that better. The hurricane is influenced by other features in the atmosphere until it becomes the dominant feature in the atmosphere. And if Dorian does get as strong as predicted, it's going to be able to influence other weather features around it, and that can throw kinks in the forecast that can give forecasters headaches, because there's a lot going on there that can kind of feed into the process that's going to steer Dorian. So there's a lot of moving parts here, and that creates headaches for forecasting. I'm going to get back to that tweet in a moment, but getting to the track, what I have pulled up here, it's from the University of Albany up in eastern New York, and this is a great site for ensemble forecasting, kind of visualizing that. And what we have here is the ensembles for, I believe this is a GFS. Let me just make sure. Yes, so this is the GFS here. And what we have here, the more red the color, the higher density of tracks that you have in a certain area. So as this, there's obviously a lot of confidence here in the forecast because this is where the storm currently is. And as it branches out, it gets a little less more cooler colors show up because there's less certainty there. The point of this is to show you individual tracks in the very skinny white lines. You have where it's basically a heat map. Think of it as a heat map. That's the word I was trying to in the back of my mind. So where there is, more vibrant colors, that's where more agreement is in the models. So for the GFS, it has Dorian making that left turn or westward turn because of a ridge that's going to be building out over the Western Atlantic. You have it pushing toward the Florida coast here. And then you have, disagreement after that. This dotted line represents, I believe that's the mean value of them. So you have, curving back. And even this scenario would give us gusty winds in North Carolina here come Tuesday, perhaps Wednesday, because down here, it's hard to see here, but I've looked at this prior, and this is the 120-hour mark. That's 5 days. So that's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, when the storm is still in central Florida, and then it would come up and get carried out by other steering currents, still giving North Carolina some gusty winds. So we're not out of the woods yet. There's still the possibility Dorian could curve and come up and pay an unwanted visit to parts of eastern North Carolina. That's something we have to watch. The GFS in this run, at least from the 18Z run, so that was earlier this afternoon, it seems to think that there's, going to be, it's going to go inland and weaken and then kind of shoot back out here. So we'll have to see what that does. And we can look at the same product for the European model, which it zoomed out a little bit here because it had tracks going all the way up here, but I'm going to kind of zoom in and take the same thing. Now this is a different, track. So there's a lot of the heat map here. There's a lot of confidence here as Dorian continues moving up. It turns that westward turn. But then in this solution from the European model, there's a lot more disagreement here. And those warm colors quickly fade because there's a lot of disagreement. A lot of them want to take it and skirt it up the coast here. A lot of these, if you look, don't even actually touch U.S. soil, but they're close enough to provide impacts. Again, I bring up Matthew. Matthew never made landfall in North Carolina, yet 26 fatalities occurred and over $1 billion in damage. Matthew never made landfall. So a storm does not have to make a landfall to have impacts. The impacts are not limited to the cone of uncertainty that you see. Impacts are very far-reaching. Hurricanes are very large storms, and a lot of people are going to get, caught off guard by what they see. A lot of people are going to get more than they bargained for. A lot of people will probably be disappointed by what they don't get. That's the nature of the beast, nature of the science. So I'm going to stop here for a question. Thanks to everyone who's tuned in and wanted to do a live stream. It's just a better way to get a lot of information out in a shorter period of time. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. Teresa asked, anything on the Jacksonville, Florida area? Yes, so you had actually reached out to me. Thank you for doing so. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me via message and I will try to bring it up in a video. She mentioned that several people were watching down that participate in greyhound racing or have dogs to take care of, and in the Daytona Beach area, Jacksonville area, Orlando area. And I'm going to jump back to the cone real quick to talk about that. So if we look at the official National Hurricane Center cone here, there's a major hurricane on your doorstep down here. Here's Cape Canaveral right here. You have Melbourne, Florida. Fort Lauderdale's down here in Miami. Miami looks to, right now, looks to be farther south of the greater impacts, but Orlando being in this area, Daytona Beach is a little bit higher. Jacksonville, none of these areas are out of the question. The average track error 5 days out is about 200 miles. And that's based on, these are professionals who are forecasting that. The models kind of give it a different solution every few hours, but the professionals take all of that data, average it, and give us a forecast that still has an average error of about 200 miles 5 days out. And that's where we stand now. We stand, 4 to 5 days out from this thing coming here, and we still have no idea on the eastern coast of Florida. Even eastern Georgia is not out of the question. Eastern South Carolina, coastal North Carolina is not out of the woods because Dorian has not yet fully evolved into what the size of the storm it's going to be. It's going to be other factors at play. How strong certain features develop determine where the storm goes. So to all of those watching who have the dogs, I think Teresa had mentioned that, they're reinforced concrete kennels, but they're, low level. I would do a couple of things. If you have an irrigation system, turn it off now because a lot of rain's coming your way. If you have a low-lying area, make sure you have a plan and practice that plan to get to a higher area. If your yard floods in a thunderstorm, it's going to flood in a hurricane. That seems like pretty common sense, but a lot of people seem to forget that hurricane brings a lot of water. There's a lot that can happen, and it can get bad very quickly. You need to make preparations now while you have several days to do so. Don't wait until, if you're in the cone, you need to be preparing. That's what the National Hurricane Center urges here. Don't wait until Sunday when it looks like it might miss you 50 miles to the south. This is going to be a major hurricane. It's going to have impacts that range far out. The cone of uncertainty is predicting where the center of the storm will be. It does not contain the impacts. The impacts of the storm, currently Dorian's about this big or so as it comes this way. Who's to say that Dorian doesn't swell up in size and then winds can be felt for hundreds of miles outside of the core, and you're trying to make preparations dealing with 45-mile-per-hour wind gusts when the hurricane is still out to sea. A lot of rain can be there too. So keep these things in mind that you need to prepare now, and you have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Hopefully this thing recurves out to sea, doesn't bother anyone. But unfortunately, with the steering currents being the way they are and the dynamics of the atmosphere forecasted to set up the way they are, it's going to shove a hurricane onto U.S. soil. So that's something we have to prepare for. I hear your concerns down there. I know that that's probably a lot of panic, a lot of, chaos trying to get everything ready. I would just prepare for, very high winds. And I want some more information, Teresa. I'm going to message you after this and try to get some more information on that. But just certainly make preparations beforehand. If you're in a flood-prone area, make accommodations. And I wouldn't evacuate yet. I would wait to hear evacuation orders from officials who know a lot more than me and can make forecasts like that and can take information and make logical decisions. I'm not in the evacuation planning business, so I don't know about that, but that's all I have to say about that topic, really. So I look forward to talking to you more to get that straightened out. If you have any other questions, feel free to comment. I'm going to go for a few more minutes here and talk more about Dorian. Thanks to all who have tuned in. I think some people have shared the broadcast. That's why I'm having a few more viewers than I usually have. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment. I am a graduate of NC State University with a meteorology degree, graduated a couple of months ago, going into the private sector of forecasting, and I am watching Dorian just as closely as most of you. And I want to again say this. There's a lot of frustration with hearing meteorologists say the same thing over and over about uncertainty. But if there's one thing that I learned in obtaining my degree in meteorology, it's that uncertainty is a certainty in meteorology. It is quantifiable. It is a thing we have to deal with, and it is always going to exist. No matter how advanced computer models get, there's still going to be the element of human interpretation. There's still going to be errors. The atmosphere is a fluid. It is a fluid thing. There's going to be so many moving parts and so many different things that enter feedback loops to other processes. And you've heard of the butterfly effect. A butterfly flapping its wings in eastern China can cause a tornado over the tornado alley. I couldn't get my words out there. So that, everything affects something else in meteorology, and that's something we have to expect. And that's something we have to integrate into forecast and convey that to people who may not be familiar with meteorological terms, who may be watching this video and don't really care about anything but how it affects them. And you have to remember that part of identifying what will affect you is getting through other people who will affect others. Yes, Teresa said no knowns and known unknowns. That's exactly right. So there's a lot going on there. So thanks to everyone who shared and commented. Going on here, this was a neat graphic I found from an app called Hurricane Tracker. It's not an app, it's actually a website called Hurricane Tracker. I believe it's $6.99 to purchase a lifetime subscription. It's worth it if you're interested in above, the surface level of understanding how these things do. And this is not an official, I can't, say that this has any merit because this is not from the Hurricane Center. You should always follow the National Hurricane Center for official information. But this is a neat graphic that just kind of shows, it gives some quantity, it gives something to grasp onto to say, hey, there's this percentage chance. So, all the cones, the cone of uncertainty has it going into eastern Florida, but, don't forget about the Bahamas here. If you have interest in the Bahamas, Abaco Island and Grand Bahama Island combined have about 70,000 people on them. They're still very much in this as well. Don't forget about the Bahamas. Miami, there's still, a 1 in 3 chance or greater that you're still going to have hurricane-like impacts. I see a couple of friends that I have down in Florida tuning in now. If you're in southern Florida, you're still very much just as in this as eastern Florida. You've seen how the track has changed over the past few days. You can see how it changes in the past. So I'm going to actually mention something. I'm going to pull up a different thing that I don't have ready in a minute and discuss something I wanted to discuss on that point about how past storms we've seen in the past couple of years, whether it be Florence. Florence's track changed a lot. It was kind of an anomaly. It did not abide by any forecast. It was a disobedient storm, if you will. It kind of, everything we forecasted it to do, it would do the opposite. So that's, these storms have a mind of their own. Even with 2018 technology, Florence still came and surprised hundreds of thousands of people and caused catastrophic flooding, closed over, I think, 2,200 or 1,200 or 2,200 roads in North Carolina. Is the most costly natural disaster to hit the state. That's with 2018 technology. We're only a year later and we're still trying to forecast these things. They're very difficult to forecast. So this kind of shows a percentage. You can kind of look at this. This -1 or this less than 1% represents Bermuda. For those who may not be familiar with the geography of the Atlantic Ocean, there's still a chance that the storm could recurve and come back to the Carolinas. That's something that is yet to be seen. Models can update so much, but depending on how strong the storm gets will determine how much it actually turns. I look back at the infrared loop, and just over the past few hours, the presentation of the storm has improved greatly. It started to grow in size. Larger storms are going to tend to curve more out. I'm going to get this purple color to contrast against the satellite loop. If the storm is larger, it's going to take a more northerly route. If it's weaker, it's going to take a more southerly route. So that's something also to keep in mind. This is a really dramatized version of that. It's not actually going to go in that direction, but a stronger storm is going to take a more northerly track. A weaker storm does not have as much force, I guess, on other features of the atmosphere and will kind of drag farther south. So if you wake up tomorrow or you wake up on Saturday or Sunday and the storm is weaker than forecast, it's likely going to be drifting farther south in that cone. If the storm is stronger than forecast, it's likely going to be pushing more towards Jacksonville, more towards Tybee Island, more towards Savannah, Georgia. So that's something we have to watch out for. Monitoring the situation now is just as important as predicting what it will be doing in a couple of days. Weather is a game of observation just as much as it is about prediction. So jumping back now here, I'm going to start winding down because it looks like I'm hitting about 23 minutes. I don't want to get too long on here and carried away, but again, I don't think the 8 p.m. advisory, it has not come out yet. So I expect it to be out. That's why I planned for 8:30, but it looks like they are compiling some numbers and trying to update the graphics package, so it is not out yet. So as of now, we have Hurricane Dorian expected to intensify overnight. We should have a major hurricane in the in the southwestern Atlantic Ocean by tomorrow afternoon or early on Saturday, and it will continue to work westward. Impacting this particular forecast track has Abaco Island and the Grand Bahama Island very much in the impacts, which is certainly scary because there are 70,000 people on these two islands combined, not including Bimini over here and also the Berry Islands in here. Andros Island is down here for reference. So there's a lot of people in here that may not be very clear on the map, but there's a lot of people in this area that are still in the cone of where the center of the storm could be. Remember, again, the impacts are not limited to the forecast cone. And then this kind of bulb-like feature at the end, kind of looks like a thermometer where you have the skinny part where the mercury rises and drops, and then the bulb here, that's because, again, for people who are still tuned in now who weren't at the beginning, this is 2 p.m. on Labor Day, on Monday. This is 2 p.m. on Tuesday. That's 24 hours to go maybe 150, 200 miles. That's a big problem in terms for flooding rains. It was looking like Dorian was going to be more of a wind threat, more of a quick mover, but flooding rains are going to be a huge concern with this as it begins to slow down. In order for the storm to make that turn back to the east and curve back out to sea, it's going to have to slow down. That's just that's a physical property. It's going to have to slow down to do that, and it looks like that slowdown is going to occur on or very close to the eastern coast of Florida, perhaps a little bit farther south, perhaps a little bit farther north. that is yet to be seen. If I was a hurricane forecaster, I would draw this cone even larger because the models are not doing anyone a favor right now, causing a lot more confusion than they are any consistency. So be prepared. If you live from Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, down to Key West, Florida, I would still be on alert and keeping a very close eye on Dorian and how it progresses tomorrow and on Saturday. And once it is around this point on Saturday, we need to reevaluate. I'm going to be doing daily video updates to try to keep you as informed as possible. I act as a channel to get National Hurricane Center information out. I don't like to give my own ideas. I don't like to give my own forecast because I don't think that really has value. I think they're professionals who have been doing this for a long period of time, a lot longer than I have, that are professionals and have seen many more hurricanes than I have. So they know a lot more about these storms than I do. I just act as a channel to push that information out. To Teresa, who asked what time will you be live tomorrow, probably around the same time. I'll aim between 8 and 9 p.m. I'm not entirely sure. I will post when I'm sure on that. It'll be tomorrow evening though. So that's pretty much what I wanted to do for this live stream. I was going to pull up some information about past hurricanes and talk about how they've kind of thrown curveballs, but I don't really think that's going to add much value to this broadcast. I've rambled on enough about the uncertainty being a certainty and things like that, so I will leave it on the infrared loop here as we watch a strengthening Dorian as it continues to work into the southwestern Atlantic, and we will see what the storm does over the next few hours. And it looks like this is trying to buffer, so as that buffers, I'm going to have some concluding thoughts here. I said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, someone's going to get a lot more than was forecast, and they're going to be probably in a bad situation. Someone's going to get exactly what was forecast, and then someone's going to be really disappointed and is going to be left high and dry when a lot of other people get more rain. That's the nature of these storms. They do not abide by rules. They don't do anything that makes sense sometimes. They're enigmas. They have their own mind sometimes. So while we do have certainty on where Dorian is right now, we have a very good idea of where it's going to go based on a lot of years of science and a lot of professionals in the Hurricane Center who are laboring to make sure that we are well informed, but we have to prepare for the worst anyway and see what has to happen. So if you have specific questions or locations, feel free to ask me offline here, and I will try to get to you as soon as possible or direct you to a source who can help you. But for now, we have a strengthening hurricane likely to become a major hurricane tomorrow, Dorian, out in the southwestern Atlantic. I will leave it on this graphic once again. And remember, anywhere in between these red lines, I would still be on high alert for this system as it continues, as we continue into the Labor Day weekend. Speaking of that really quickly, I do want to mention if you have Labor Day plans in North Carolina, you are fine. Do not cancel them. If you have Labor Day plans in Florida, cancel them and make sure you are safe. This has the storm on Labor Day as a major hurricane off the coast. If you are up here in North Carolina or north of Charleston, I'll say, you should be fine for Labor Day plans. So keep that in mind. No need to cancel anything or have any haste in doing so. If you have any trips to Florida, I would definitely reevaluate that and make sure you're smart and safe about that. So that's where I'm going to conclude. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. I appreciate you watching and interacting with me. This is a much easier way to get information out there. If you have any questions offline, feel free to tweet me. I'm more active on Twitter with hurricanes because there's a lot of experts on there that I follow that know a lot more than me, and I like to share and get information out. So follow me on Twitter there at AndrewWXCenter. And then you can comment on Facebook or message me as well. And I will be back online sometime tomorrow. And thanks for the info. Watching from New Jersey with concern for the Greyhound and their trainers in Florida. Yeah, me too. That's certainly something to watch. Teresa introduced that to me as well. So for those in Daytona Beach, Jacksonville, Orlando, just be aware of the situation. I wouldn't hastily run into anything right now. I think that the storm is going to impact eastern Florida. I think that's the most likely landing spot for it. I'd like to talk to some of you offline maybe and give some more information, but I would just be very wise. If you've had problems flooding in the past, I would take precautions to do so. And I would just keep an eye on the storm closely, and we'll see what Dorian has in store and what chapter it writes in the history books. April asked, will this storm go into the Gulf of Mexico? That did look like a possibility the past couple of days, but now it is looking less likely as we're going to have an upper level low out here in the Gulf of Mexico that's going to be rotating the same way as Dorian. So as it's pushing out this way and Dorian's coming this way, there's going to be winds at the upper levels pushing against Dorian, and it's going to try to push it back out to sea. So the Gulf of Mexico scenario looks less likely at this time. that certainly would be an interesting scenario. That climatology doesn't favor that. Usually storms don't do that. If you were to take an average of all the hurricanes, it's very unlikely that they go back into the Gulf and then recurve. So April, I don't think that's going to happen. We'll have to keep an eye on it, but it looks like Dorian's going to either turn over Florida or turn right before Florida and go out to sea after that. All right, I think I'm going to end that there. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Be sure to tune into the National Hurricane Center for the latest, and thank you very much for watching. Be safe.